He had no idea that the pregnant woman standing in his living room had just inherited $800 billion from the secret billionaire father she never spoke about. Unaware and blinded by cruelty, he kicked his pregnant wife out of the house for the unforgivable sin of feeding a beggar, not knowing that the beggar was actually her late father's lawyer, holding documents that would turn his world to ashes within hours. The silence that followed his final words was heavier than shouting. Daniel Kingsley stood rigid in the middle of the spacious living room of their Lekki home, chest rising with self-righteous anger, eyes burning with a satisfaction that only power or the illusion of it could bring. To him, this was authority. This was dominance. This was what a man did when his rules were broken. Across from him, Amelia Kingsley said nothing. Her hand instinctively rested on her swollen belly, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear but from the quiet realization that something inside her had just shifted forever. The baby kicked once, softly, as if responding to the tension, as if reminding her that silence did not mean weakness. Daniel mistook that silence for defeat. "I don't want to see you in this house again," he snapped, pacing. "You embarrass me, feeding a dirty beggar at my gate, while I'm out there building my reputation." The gate. Amelia's mind drifted back to the afternoon sun, the smell of dust and diesel, the tired eyes of the man who had stood by the gate in a worn brown suit that looked too dignified for his circumstance. How he had spoken gently, how he had refused the food at first, how he had said her father's name. Her father. Daniel didn't know that name. Daniel didn't know anything. "You think money grows on trees?" Daniel continued. "You think because you're pregnant, you can disgrace me?" Still, Amelia said nothing. Silence, she had learned long ago, was not emptiness. It was preparation. Years earlier, long before Lekki, before marble floors and designer furniture, Amelia had grown up in Ibadan, in a quiet compound where her mother taught her one lesson, over and over. Never explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Her mother had died early. Her father had vanished even earlier, or so she had been told. She had learned to survive without noise. Daniel mistook her calm for submission and stepped closer, voice lowering into something more dangerous. "Leave! Tonight!" The word tonight echoed. Amelia finally lifted her eyes to meet his. There was no anger in them, no begging, just a calm that unsettled him in ways he didn't understand. "All right," she said softly. One word. That was all. Daniel froze, not because he cared, but because he had expected tears, pleading, drama. He had expected power to feel louder. Instead, it felt hollow. Amelia walked past him slowly, each step deliberate. She went to the bedroom, folded her clothes with the same care she once folded hope into this marriage. With every item placed into her suitcase, fragments of the past surfaced: Daniel's early charm, his promises, how control had replaced affection so subtly she hadn't noticed until it was complete. Downstairs, Daniel made a call, already spinning a narrative. "Yes, she's unstable. Pregnancy hormones. You know women." Upstairs, Amelia paused as another memory surfaced: her father's voice, faint but unmistakable, from a childhood she thought she had imagined. "When the time comes, you won't need to fight, just watch." She didn't know then what he had meant, but she would. When she stepped out of the house with her suitcase, the security guards looked away. They had seen this before. Wealth did that: it trained people to look away from injustice. Outside, the streetlights flickered. The night air wrapped around her like a question waiting to be answered. Daniel slammed the door behind her. The sound echoed longer than he expected. He didn't notice the black SUV parked across the street. He didn't see the man inside adjusting his glasses, gripping a leather briefcase, eyes fixed on the house with a mixture of patience and inevitability. The beggar. Amelia paused at the gate, one hand on her belly, the other on her suitcase. She didn't cry. She walked. Behind her, Daniel felt victorious. Ahead of her, karma had already begun its quiet work. The night Amelia Kingsley walked away from the house that once defined her pain, Lagos did what it always did, kept moving, indifferent to personal tragedies. Cars sped past, generators hummed, distant laughter spilled from roadside bars. Life didn't pause just because hers had been violently rearranged. Yet somewhere in the dark, destiny was recalculating. Amelia had not gone far when the black SUV rolled to a stop beside her. The engine purred softly, expensive but restrained, the kind of car that never announced itself unless necessary. The passenger window slid down with controlled precision. "Mrs. Kingsley," a voice said. She stopped, not from fear but from recognition. The man she had fed earlier stood there, no longer slouched, no longer masked by poverty. His posture was straight now, his eyes sharp, his suit clean beneath the dim streetlight as if the dirt had never truly belonged to him. "I hoped you would stop," he said gently. Amelia's heart pounded, not because she felt threatened, but because every instinct she had learned to trust was screaming that this moment mattered. "You followed me," she said. "Yes," he replied without apology, "because silence has its limits, and because tonight was not supposed to end with you alone on the street." She studied him more closely now. The accent, the calm, the way his hands rested on the leather briefcase, like it carried more than paper. "You said my father's name," she whispered. "No one does that." The man nodded slowly, because most people were never meant to know him. The words hit harder than Daniel's cruelty ever had. A flashback tugged at her herself at 12, standing beside her mother's grave, asking where her father was, being told some men are better loved from a distance, being handed a sealed letter that said, "Not yet." "I am Jonathan Hale," the man said, "senior legal counsel to Arthur Sterling." The world tilted. Arthur Sterling. The name she had buried so deeply she had convinced herself it was a childhood fantasy. The name that had appeared in whispered business articles, global finance scandals, anonymous donations that changed cities overnight. "You're lying," Amelia said, though her voice lacked conviction. Jonathan didn't argue. He opened the briefcase just enough for her to see embossed documents, official seals, signatures that carried weight far beyond Nigeria. He closed it again. "Your father died this morning in Zurich," he said, peacefully, and exactly as he predicted. Her knees weakened. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if reacting to the emotional shockwave rippling through her body. "He knew this would happen," Jonathan continued. "He knew the truth could only surface after you had been tested, after the people around you revealed who they truly were." A bitter laugh escaped her. "So being thrown out while pregnant was a test?" "A confirmation," Jonathan corrected, "that you inherited more than his blood. You inherited his restraint." The silence returned, but this time it was not empty. It was powerful. Jonathan opened the door. "Please, get in." Inside the SUV, warmth wrapped around her. Not just physical warmth, but a sense of being seen, protected, accounted for. "What happens now?" she asked. Jonathan looked ahead, not at her. "Now we prepare. Your father left instructions. Strict ones. For Daniel?" she asked quietly. Jonathan paused. "He will not be punished yet," he said. "Justice is most effective when it believes it is winning." Amelia swallowed. For the first time since the night began, anger stirred, not explosive, but cold and deliberate. "And the inheritance?" she asked. Jonathan's lips curved faintly. $800 billion in assets, trusts, equities, and global holdings. But none of it activates until one condition is met. Her breath caught. "Which is?" Jonathan turned to her, eyes unreadable. "You must remain legally invisible for 30 days. No announcements, no confrontation, no reaction. 30 days. Outside, Daniel poured himself a drink, already rehearsing how he would explain Amelia's disappearance to his associates. He didn't notice the email landing in his inbox, an invitation to a routine audit of his company's finances. He didn't know the audit was funded by the same empire he had just thrown out of his house. Back in the SUV, Amelia rested her head against the seat, exhaustion finally catching up. "My father, why now?" she whispered. Jonathan's voice softened. "Because some truths only survive when revealed after betrayal." The SUV disappeared into the Lagos night. And behind them, a countdown had begun, one that would not just change Daniel's life, but dismantle everything he believed power looked like. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to my channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent." Now, let's continue. By the third morning after Amelia Kingsley disappeared, Lagos had begun to notice. Not loudly. Lagos never did anything loudly at first. It noticed in pauses, in delayed callbacks, in the subtle way doors that once swung open now required appointments. Daniel Kingsley felt it the moment he walked into his office on Victoria Island. The receptionist didn't smile. It was a small thing. Insignificant, even. But in Lagos, small things were signals. Respect here was never demanded, it was felt, and that feeling had shifted. He went straight to his office, shrugging off the unease. On his desk lay a neatly arranged stack of documents, each stamped pending verification. His assistant stood by the door, hesitant. "Sir," she said carefully, "First Continental Bank called again. They're asking for clarification on the offshore inflows tied to Kingsley Group's last 3 projects." Daniel stiffened. "Again?" "Yes, sir. They said it's part of a broader alignment review." Alignment. Another lie people used to stay polite. "Tell them I'll come in myself," Daniel said. "Today." Across the city, Amelia sat in a private suite overlooking the lagoon, the curtains half drawn. Jonathan had chosen the place for its anonymity, owned by a trust, staffed by people who asked no questions. On the table before her lay several files, each thinner than she expected. "That's all?" she asked. Jonathan nodded. "Your father hated excess, especially in documentation. Everything here connects to something else." Amelia flipped through, her eyes scanning names, shell companies, properties hidden behind layers of proxies, some in Lagos, some far beyond. She didn't touch anything directly. She didn't sign anything. She simply read and learned. "This man," she said, pointing to a name. "He was at our wedding." Jonathan allowed himself a small smile. Many were. She closed the file gently. Daniel trusted them. "Yes," Jonathan said. "That was the design." Back on Victoria Island, Daniel sat across from 3 men in dark suits inside a glass-walled conference room at First Continental Bank's headquarters. The view of the city stretched behind them, Lagos glittering, confident, unforgiving. "We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Kingsley," one of the men said smoothly. "But certain transactions require clarity." "I've been banking here for over a decade," Daniel replied sharply. "You know my portfolio." "We do," another man said. "Which is why these discrepancies stand out." Discrepancies. Daniel leaned back, masking his irritation. "So, what exactly are you saying?" The first man folded his hands. "Effective immediately. Several accounts will be temporarily restricted pending review. Operational accounts remain active for now." "For now?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "You can't do this without notice." The man met his gaze calmly. "We just did. That was it." The first irreversible loss didn't come with sirens or headlines. It came with a realization. Daniel was no longer steering the ship. He left the bank with his phone pressed to his ear, calling names that once answered on the first ring. One promised to look into it. Another didn't pick up at all. A third suggested he lay low for a bit. Lay low. The words echoed like an insult. At the Ikoyi Club that evening, Daniel walked into a room full of familiar faces and felt invisible for the first time in his life. Conversations continued without pause. Laughter didn't adjust for his presence. A seat beside a powerful real estate mogul remained conspicuously empty. Not saved for him. Across the room, two men spoke in low tones, glancing his way. Not with fear, with assessment. In Lagos, assessment always preceded abandonment. Meanwhile, Amelia stood before a mirror, adjusting a simple dress Jonathan had chosen. No designer labels, no markers of wealth. "You look different," Jonathan observed. "I feel different," she replied. She had stopped flinching at names, stopped shrinking at silence. The woman who once begged for peace now understood the weight of patience. "What happens if he collapses too quickly?" she asked. Jonathan's expression hardened. "He won't. Not yet." "Why?" "Because your father believed something very strongly," he said. "A man must understand what he lost before he loses everything." That night, Daniel returned home to an empty house and an unread message blinking on his phone. Subject: Notice of Review, Kingsley Estates. He opened it slowly, the words blurred. His property portfolio, his pride, had been flagged. Titles under review, transfers paused. Daniel sank onto the couch, breath shallow. This wasn't coincidence. This was orchestration. And somewhere, deep beneath the fear, another thought crept in, one he refused to voice. Amelia. Across the city, Amelia closed her eyes, one hand resting on her belly, the other on the file marked Day 3. The countdown continued, and Daniel Kingsley had just lost the one thing Lagos never forgave you for losing: standing. By the time Friday arrived, Daniel Kingsley understood something he had never been forced to understand before. Lagos was not turning against him. Lagos was waiting. It was in the pauses between returned calls, in the emails that began with "Dear Mr. Kingsley" instead of "My brother," in the way meetings no longer started when he entered the room, but when someone else decided they should. This was not chaos. It was calculation. Daniel stood in front of the mirror longer than usual that evening, adjusting his cufflinks with hands that refused to be completely steady. The invitation to the charity fundraiser lay on the dresser behind him, its gold lettering catching the light. He had considered ignoring it. In another season, his absence alone would have been noted, but absence now would look like fear. And fear, in Lagos, was fatal. The venue at Eco Atlantic glittered with controlled excess. Valets moved with quiet efficiency. Security men stood like statues, scanning faces that had already been pre-approved by reputation. Inside, the room hummed with layered conversations, business wrapped in pleasantries, power disguised as generosity. Daniel entered with his usual posture intact, shoulders squared, chin lifted. He smiled. He greeted people by name. He laughed at the right moments. Yet something was wrong. The laughter did not linger. Handshakes ended too quickly. Conversations stalled as if they had reached their natural conclusion the moment he joined them. More than once, Daniel found himself standing beside men who used to orbit him, men who now spoke past him, around him, without quite including him. He told himself it was nothing. But denial could only last so long. When the master of ceremonies took the stage to speak about integrity and long-term stability, Daniel felt the room subtly reorient. It wasn't obvious. No one turned to stare at him. No finger pointed. Still, he knew. Because in Lagos, when the room goes quiet around you, it isn't because you're being attacked. It's because you're being evaluated. He left early, citing another engagement. Outside, the night air felt heavier than it should have. The drive home was silent, the city lights blurring past the window, like a life he was no longer fully part of. Across the city, Amelia sat in a softly lit room. Jonathan seated across from her, a thin tablet resting on the table between them. He hadn't shown her live footage. He knew better. Instead, he showed her still moments, where Daniel stood. Who stood beside him? Who didn't? Amelia studied each image slowly, carefully, as though she were learning a new language. They didn't attack him, she said. No, Jonathan replied. They never do. They withdrew. Jonathan nodded. That's the first warning Lagos gives. She leaned back, one hand resting protectively over her belly. The movement was instinctive now, not emotional. Her body understood before her mind fully caught up. Her phone vibrated. Once. She looked at the screen and felt something tighten in her chest, not pain, not fear, but the echo of a bond that had already snapped. Daniel. The message was simple, uncharacteristically so. Please. We need to talk. Amelia didn't open it. She didn't need to. Jonathan watched her closely. If you respond, he said gently, the clock resets. And if I don't? She asked. Jonathan's voice lowered. Then the system proceeds. She turned the phone face down on the table and pushed it away from her. I've spent years explaining myself to someone who never listened, she said quietly. I won't break my silence now. Jonathan exhaled slowly, then reached into his briefcase and placed a document before her. This is what your father prepared for moments like this. Amelia read every line. She didn't rush. By the time she reached the final clause, her breathing had changed, not faster, but deeper, grounded. This isn't revenge, she said. No, Jonathan agreed. It's insulation. That night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, drink untouched, staring at his phone. The message remained unread. For the first time since Amelia left, the possibility struck him with terrifying clarity. She wasn't silent because she was broken. She was silent because she had moved on to a place he could no longer reach. And in Lagos, when your name stops opening doors, something far worse always follows. The night Daniel Kingsley finally understood the cost of his choices did not arrive with chaos. It arrived quietly. He woke before dawn, the house still wrapped in darkness, the air heavy with the hum of generators from neighboring homes. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented, waiting for the familiar sense of command to settle into his chest, the confidence that had always greeted him at the start of every day. It didn't come. Instead, there was a hollowness he could not name. Daniel rose and walked through the house, barefoot on cold marble floors, passing rooms that once felt like proof of his success. Every achievement now seemed oddly weightless, like trophies from a game no one was playing anymore. His phone buzzed on the dining table. He reached for it too quickly. Not Amelia. An automated notification. Another polite message. Another reminder that certain processes were still under review. Daniel sat down heavily, scrolling through his emails, his pulse accelerating as patterns began to form. Partnerships paused. Meetings postponed indefinitely. A property transfer delayed, pending clarification. Each message alone was survivable. Together, they told a story. And Daniel was no longer the author. Across the city, Amelia sat at the dining table of the apartment Jonathan had secured for her, morning light spilling across the surface in pale gold streaks. She ate slowly, deliberately, listening to the rhythm of her own breathing, to the subtle movements of the child inside her. She had slept well. That realization surprised her. Jonathan joined her quietly, setting a folder on the table without a word. He didn't open it. He didn't rush her. When she finally looked up, he spoke. Today is the last day of the invisibility period's first phase, he said. Nothing will be announced. Nothing will be explained. Amelia nodded. And after today? Jonathan met her eyes. After today, consequences stop waiting. She placed her hand over the folder but did not open it. Instead, her mind drifted backward to the moment Daniel had shouted, to the way his voice had filled the room, to the certainty with which he had believed himself untouchable. She realized then that his greatest mistake had not been cruelty. It had been assumption. Back at the house, Daniel dressed carefully, choosing a suit he associated with confidence, with authority. He told himself that appearances still mattered, that showing up strong could still correct the narrative forming around him. But Lagos was no longer watching his appearance. It was watching his reactions. By midday, the call came. A senior associate, one of the few Daniel still trusted, spoke carefully, choosing each word like it might explode if handled incorrectly. We need to separate ourselves from certain assets, the man said, temporarily, for protection. Protection from what? Daniel demanded. A pause. From you? The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, chest tightening as something cold and irreversible settled into place. This wasn't sabotage. This was isolation. He had spent years believing power meant being feared. He had never learned what happened when fear expired. In the apartment, Amelia finally opened the folder. Inside were confirmations, not announcements, not headlines, but acknowledgments. Adjustments completed, transfers rerouted, legal permissions activated, without her signature ever appearing on a single page. The system her father had built was now fully awake. Jonathan watched her closely. "Once this step completes," he said, "there's no undoing it, even if you speak to him later, even if you forgive him." Amelia absorbed that quietly. True power, she understood now, wasn't about revenge. It was about finality. She closed the folder. "Proceed," she said. Jonathan didn't smile. He simply nodded. That evening, Daniel returned home early again, the weight of the day dragging at his shoulders. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and sat alone, staring at the door as if willing Amelia to walk through it. His phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't automated. It was a notification from the property registry. Status update. Ownership adjusted. Daniel's breath caught. He refreshed the screen. Again, the words didn't change. Something he had always believed was solid, permanent, had moved without his consent. For the first time, fear gave way to understanding. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was design. And suddenly, painfully, one name filled the silence of the room. Amelia. Across the city, Amelia stood by the window, Lagos spread out beneath her like a living map of consequence and cause. She felt calm, not triumphant, not cruel. Just resolved. She had not spoken a word. And yet, everything had answered. She placed both hands over her belly, grounding herself in the present. In the future, she was protecting, not the past she was leaving behind. Somewhere in the city, Daniel Kingsley sat surrounded by everything he once controlled, realizing too late that he had already lost the one thing that mattered most. Not his money, not his status, but the right to decide what happened next. The silence he had dismissed had finished its sentence. This is just the beginning. Comment part 2 if you love this story and want us to drop the other part. Don't forget to tell us where you are watching from.